Hello and welcome to Heart to Art. I am so thrilled for today's episode. If you love speculative fiction, what if dystopian scenarios, this episode is for you. I'm so excited to have author Humberto da Silva with me today. He's written an amazing book, Compassion Fatigue, and other stories of the indecent past, weird present, and feared future. And I can't wait to talk to him about his imagination and how he comes up with these absolutely amazing creative scenarios. So, welcome, Umberto.
Thank you, Peta-Gaye, and thank you for having me on Heart to Art. So honored to be here. Love your writing too. I really, really am happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you here to share with everyone your imagination because in one of your stories, you talk about the sea is no longer blue. It's a slurry mess and so many other things. So let's start with what inspired you to write this collection of speculative short stories?
Well, the last 30 years have been a huge change in all of our lives between technology and the way that the planet's going, et cetera. And as a writer, really, the only way to make sense of it is through speculative fiction, in a lot of cases, because you have to speculate about what the day after tomorrow will look like. And really, that's kind of what inspired me in all of the stories is to try and imagine where is this all going and where are we going to be in a few days.
And it's such a timely subject now as we see the world changing in unimaginable ways. But for people who don't know the difference between science fiction and speculative fiction, how would you describe that difference?
Traditionally, science fiction has been, a lot of space opera or really concerned with the technology of what's going on. Whereas speculative fiction tends to be more, what will it be like if we just stay on the current path we're on? And what's it going to be like in a week or 10 years or 15 years? So not very far down the road. And that's more what I indulge in is the day after tomorrow stuff as opposed to what's it going to be like in 5,000 years.
I agree. It makes it so much more real and actually frightening than a lot of the space stuff. And some of your stories truly were frightening. I'm thinking about the first one that I read where the world has pretty much ended and so many others in between. But you also have a very creative bent. So let's talk about the actual story, Compassion Fatigue. It really intrigued me because it was not written in a linear story manner.
I do also like to read experimental writing, like William Burroughs, for instance, a writer who wrote in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of it was disjointed. And I have the feeling that people are experiencing the world now as a little bit disjointed and not like a linear narrative. You're getting information from so many different places. You're experiencing the planet change before you. You're staring at so many screens. I don't think people experience their life as a linear narrative anymore. I think they experience it as a series of shocks. And that's what I was trying to replicate with the style of the story, Compassion Fatigue itself.
And the headlines in that story, were those actual headlines taken from newspapers or just news at the time?
They were generally headlines taken from newspapers in the late 80s, as well as tabloid headlines, which, we now think of as clickbait. But at the time, if you were standing in line at the supermarket, you would see the National Enquirer or other such things, pushing stories that weren't really true, but just meant to shock you into buying the paper. And I've used some of those. And they've come to fruition in the form of clickbait.
I was just going to say those headlines are so applicable to today's news or fake news or real news, whatever, but such a fascinating read. I highly recommend this book if you love this. So like Black Mirror on Netflix, if you like that kind of
I
thing. And
love that show.
I love that, right? So excited. You mentioned in that same story that there's enough food on the planet to make everyone fat. Was this factual or just a part of fiction?
All of that is factual. I love, for instance, Margaret Atwood when she did The Handmaid's Tale. She didn't actually write anything that hadn't happened before. That was her rule for herself, is, you're writing speculative fiction, but you don't put anything in it that hasn't already happened. And that is a fact. And it's, in fact, a fact to this day. We create enough wealth and food on the planet to feed everybody and to put a roof over everybody's head. But it's the systems that we have in place that prevent, everybody from at least having a decent, subsisting life.
And would you say this is all government systems?
I think we've gone a little too far in, for instance, the capitalist system and saying, well, the market is going to take care of everything. And we think that by letting some people get really rich, that somehow it's going to trickle down to everybody. But in Toronto these days, you can see people living in the park. And I think things like that are tragic in a system that's in a wealthy country like Canada.
It is tragic. You also belong to an organization called rabble.ca. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how it that influences your writing? Because I feel that being so involved in journalism probably gives you a lot of creative fodder.
I'm When we first got the, ability to broadcast on YouTube and to read magazines online, a magazine was started called rabble.ca, which essentially is an online news magazine. And I won a contest actually called Not Rex Murphy. So I became like a broadcaster known as Not Rex. And my opinions on video basically were, things very different from how Rex Murphy saw the world. And I did that for about 5 years. So I was briefly infamous for comparing some of Stephen Harper's policies to Hitler in a little bit of an exaggerated way. But it gave me a really good introduction as to how the social media was developing and how you get canceled and how you get sort of attacked. So that was very interesting, and that gave me plenty of fodder for this book as well as for future books.
I can imagine. So I'm a short story writer too, love the genre. What has drawn you to the short story?
Well, first of all, I love your short stories. I read Told You Stories this summer and was one of the books of 2024 that I couldn't put down. I had to read it all the way through. I thought your depiction of the immigrant experience was amazing. Your portrayal of, Jamaican customs and within a family was just brilliant. So I couldn't put that down.
Thank
But the
you.
short story, as you well know, is a beautiful way of creating a portrait, and that somebody can take it in bite-sized pieces. I find it easier sometimes, and it's a very Canadian kind of genre as well. But it's a way to create like an intimate portrait that sticks with you sometimes in a way that a novel that you read over a week or two doesn't stick with you. And you know it very well, Peta-Gaye, because you craft short stories that are intimate portraits of a situation. I can't forget the Jamaican mother trying to protect her daughter from, being turned out to a gang leader. The
Hitman.
Yeah, and the one that really got me because I'm a former union representative was your depiction of sexual harassment in the workplace, which I just thought, wow, what a detailed and shocking portrayal of how, somebody actually experiences that. And I thought, wow, that could be used as a piece of educational material.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, it wasn't Hitman, it was Saved from the Dawn.
Mhm.
Yes, I do love the short story genre for exactly that. a piece in time, a moment in time, or, it could be many months or a year in time, but we can get so creative with how to do the short story. But you are working on a novel now. What made you make that transition?
Short stories just start getting longer. The book I'm currently have submitted and hopefully will be published in the near future the first working title was Philomena in the New World, which was one of the stories in it. And now I think that the working title is going to be Portuguese Damage because, like your books, I mean, it sort of talks about the experience that people have in the immigration of their families to Canada, what they left back home. And that's what this last book is about. And then that book was supposed to be three short stories, and it turned into three novellas of about 80, 90 pages each with some satellite short stories. And then I was working on another short story, and I just couldn't stop writing it. So that is how I kind of transitioned to a novel. And that's what I'm working on now.
Can't wait for that to come out. And of course, all your information will be up for anyone who wants to follow you. Do you find that being Portuguese Canadian or being Portuguese just kind of seeps into your stories?
It does. It's hard to not have your culture um, seep into your stories. It's how we are made, the experience of growing up. I mean, my father came to Canada in 1957 and was illegal in Canada. He came on a tourist visa, overstayed it, and started working. He'd originally gone to Venezuela and it didn't work out there. He hadn't seen my mother in 5 years. She came in 1959. And my brother was left to grow up back home. So I didn't actually know my brother well, I knew him briefly as a toddler, but didn't know him until much later. So the connections and the things we lose in our immigration experience very much informs us as people and informs our writing. You know that.
Absolutely. How painful, to hear some of these immigration stories because one does lose a lot. It's almost too painful for me to even think about your brother being left in Portugal. But for circumstance, right? Sometimes it
It's
just
always
happens that
circumstance.
way. And
Mhm.
not seeing your father, not seeing your mom for 5 years.
That's just the way. I mean, people made huge sacrifices to try and find a better life in Canada, and they continue to do so. I mean, I feel terrible for anybody who comes to Canada today because you work harder and it's much harder to get ahead than it used to be. Canada is not quite the, land of opportunity that it was when my parents got here. So
Mm.
it's a very tough row for immigrants nowadays. And we experience that and it forms us. So why not write about these things?
Absolutely. And that brings me back again to the what if scenarios. Um, so my question is, and I believe I know the answer, but I want to know how. How do your stories reflect personal experiences, beliefs, or fears that you have?
I think my stories are a kind of therapy for me. You're always trying to work out your fears in fiction, as well as your hurt, the things that hurt you in your life, the difficult experiences you've had. You find characters that become vehicles for those stories, and then you sometimes exaggerate a little bit. I mean, that's how we do it as writers. We tend to try to focus very harsh light, like a filmmaker, on a certain scene, and it makes stories better. I don't think you can really just write pure fiction. I think it should always be informed by your experience and your experiences as a person. And the immigration experience is very powerful. It does influence people. I mean, a lot of my favorite writers right now are coming out of Scarborough. Taya Mutonji, Catherine Hernandez, the new wave of immigrant writers writing from Scarborough, which I think are just genius.
Who else influenced your writing?
I mean, I'm 63, so a lot of the writers that influenced my writing, were active in the 60s and 70s. Michael Ondaatje was one of my professors. Margaret Atwood, Canadian short story writer, highly influential. Loved the intricacy of her prose, which you have a little bit in common with. You also write very tight, informative, lyrical prose about things that are sometimes quite difficult, which is one of the things I loved about Atwood.
Mhm.
Um, William Burroughs. There's a writer called Hubert Selby who wrote Last Exit to Brooklyn, which was a very experimental book, which I read probably every few years.
Wow.
Yeah, those would be my influences.
I need that list from you. Um, so, what do you hope readers will take away when they read a book like Compassion Fatigue? I mean, is there the hope that people will suddenly wake up, or do you think it might be just too late for that?
I hope that they will be able to gauge from the stories, whether they're linear narratives or disjointed narratives, on how to read and decode their world so that they can still try to make it a better place. I grew up, I saw them stop the Vietnam War with protests. I remember the tail end of the civil rights movement where people, really did transform a racist society. And I'm hoping, I've been on defense for the last 50 years because things have not been getting better, but I'm hoping that at some point people do wake up and try to bring back good values to our society so that we don't have to drive by people sleeping in the park and long lines in front of food banks.
Our society today really does give a lot of ideas for what could possibly get worse in the future, and I certainly hope it doesn't. But if you had a choice and you had to live in one of the worlds that you created in Compassion Fatigue, which world would that be?
I don't think I would want to inhabit any of the worlds because it is dystopian. Unfortunately, I think we're inhabiting all of those worlds. The one I probably identify with the most is the father in Factory Planet trying to protect his young son from the inevitability of an AI machine strip mining their little island in the middle of the Atlantic. That's how it feels sometimes. I mean, I have two kids. I've always been a little bit anxious about how the world was going for them. I've always considered myself fortunate to have lived in the time I did and the place I did. But I fear sometimes for our children that things are not going to be quite as rosy as they were for my generation. So, although I wouldn't choose to live in that world, I think in many ways we are kind of stuck in that world. And that's who I probably identify with the most.
I think that's why speculative fiction is so, I don't know, incredibly drawing me in anyway, and terrifying, because a lot of the stories were too true, almost. And I did feel in some of your writing that, you were writing about the now. And I was hopeful at one time, except when you hear things like what the phones and social media are doing to our children's brains, then you start to think, well, maybe I'm not as hopeful as I used to be. But I just wanted to also mention for the audience that Compassion Fatigue, the short story, was part of the best Canadian short stories in 1992. Oberon Press, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, it was Oberon Press. They do
Oberon.
a yearly collection of best short stories in Canada's, and Compassion Fatigue was that story, or one of those stories in 1992 in that anthology. So
Yeah.
I
Oh,
have been published a few places before, but the tough thing about writing is tough to make a living at it, so how to keep my day job.
It is, and you had a day job for years. Are you still in the day job?
I've recently retired and I can now finally say I'm a full-time writer where I always wanted to be, but really couldn't afford to do that and raise my family in a way that was adequate.
Like all of us, including myself, what advice would you give to young people who really want this, but they have to have that day job?
The best thing you can have is discipline because you should always do the thing if you're a creative that you need to do. If you're a creative person and you don't do your creative thing, whatever it is, you're killing your soul. So do the work you need to do to keep your body and soul together, but do your creative thing. Have the discipline to do that as well.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Thank you so much. We are looking forward to it's called Portuguese Damage.
Portuguese Damage is the working title. I'm not sure if my publisher will agree to that as the final title, but it's just about the way that the immigration experience and the Portuguese culture kind of ding ways along the route to becoming part of Canadian society.
Can't wait to read that. Thank you so much for coming on today. It was such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you for having me on, Peta. I'm honored to be here. I love your work as well, and look forward to reading more from you in the future as well.
Thank you. And for anyone listening, I absolutely recommend Compassion Fatigue. It's on Amazon, am I correct?
You can get it on Amazon and at a few independent bookstores in Toronto as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Humberto.
Thank you, Peta. All the best to you and the family, and thanks for having me on.
It was a pleasure. Keep writing.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.